Well, hello there, little masters, and welcome to another weekly episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, Bilbo finally finds the comfort he's been looking for.
West to Ha, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, the there to my back again, Alan Sisto.
I like that one. Folks, this is it, the final chapter of the memoir of Mr. Bilbo Baggins, entitled There and Back Again, but better known to everyone today as The Hobbit. Here in Chapter 19, the last stage, Bilbo comes home. And while he doesn't exactly find Sharky and Lotho Pimple running things, not everything's quite right. But don't want to be too hasty. We'll get there soon enough.
Too soon, actually. In fact, I'm starting to wish we could stay in this book forever.
That would be nice.
But I know we can't.
No, sadly.
No, but I think we can put off the inevitable for a little bit longer by stalling with another segment, right?
I think we can. Why not? And for this episode, we've got another Philology Fair.
Nice. Very nice. You know, I'm kind of surprised that we haven't given this word its own philology segment before. We've talked about it once or twice, only briefly. But I think it's worth spending some time on because we're going to be spending a lot of time with this word over the next year or two or three or more.
Or,
or six. That word is wizard.
Well, a segment on the word wizard is never late, Lord of the Mark. It arrives precisely when it means to.
Well done. Well played.
We've talked a lot on the show about the fact that Gandalf isn't that kind of wizard. And that is, he's not a magic user who casts spells that he's learned from studying the arcane arts. Of course, that hasn't stopped us from having a little fun with turning Gandalf into a D&D character. But
he was up all night swilling Pepsi for that one.
And eating Doritos and
eating Doritos and pizza rolls. Yeah,
he's got the orange fingers going. It's just a mess. But as we've discussed a few times, that isn't really what. Well, that's definitely not what Tolkien had in mind when he called him a wizard.
Not
that's
quite.
Really far from what he had in mind.
Yeah.
But even this sort of arcane spellcaster isn't what he was thinking about. But what exactly did he mean? Why did he call him, along with Saruman, Radagast, and the other Istari, wizards?
Well, the Elvish word for the order was Istari. I think that's a word that most people are probably familiar with if they've read Lord of the Rings or the Silmarillion. It appears a couple of times in the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, but interestingly, not once in the text itself. But basically, this word Istari is the plural of Istar. It's the Quenya word for one who knows. That is, somebody who's knowledgeable about, stuff, things, the world.
Okay.
It comes from a root is, meaning to know. You find that information in the etymologies, which is in The Lost Road, History of Middle-earth, Volume 5. And it's related to a whole host of similar words, such as ista or istya, which means knowledge, istiar, which means scholar or learned man, and so on. Now, wizard, of course, is an English word that's made up of basically just the word wise, plus the suffix ard, A-R-D.
Right.
And that was chosen as a translation of Istar, although Tolkien always knew that it was problematic. He actually has a little quote in Unfinished Tales that I'm going to bring out here where he says, "The translation, though suitable in its relation to wise and other ancient words of knowing, similar to that of Istar in Quenya, is not perhaps happy, since Heren Istarion, or Order of Wizards, was quite distinct from wizards and magicians of later legend."
Exactly. And, he made similar comments in a bunch of different letters. I think that 131, 144, I think. I don't remember all of them, but he was always pointing out that it wasn't really a suitable word because of that association with magicians.
Right.
But he did point out in letter 144, for example, that he tried to distinguish it from other magician terms. So he seems to be trying to simultaneously make us think of wizards in popular folklore while also telling us that these wizards are something else entirely.
I think that's exactly right. And I think it's a really delicate balancing act that I think he actually manages to pull off pretty well. Very well, actually. Now, normally I would give some evidence that Tolkien is reviving an older usage of the word wizard that's been forgotten in the the dustbin of history.
He does like to do that.
He does love to do that. And it is true. The Oxford English Dictionary gives an earlier kind of simple, no magic required meaning of philosopher or sage, which I think we could probably agree is applicable to the Istari.
So a magic wizard, is that like a vegetarian hamburger?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, really, it's kind of
Right.
like, okay, maybe.
Just a wise man, a philosopher.
Yeah.
And that's the first definition of wizard. And I think that one had occurrences as early as, I believe, 1440. And it was used that way until about the 1800s, where it pretty much
Oh, wow.
died out in favor
Okay.
of the
more
really
magical
magical version of it.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the magician sense of the word is actually attested as early as 1552, possibly
Wow, that's older than I
1500.
thought.
I know.
Wow.
It's not long after the first occurrence of the word in English. There's an occurrence of it in 1500 that the scholars think could probably go either way. They think it could, in context, it could mean a magician. It could mean just a wise man. So the association of the word specifically with magicians is really almost as old as the word itself, and
Right.
the older version of it being just a simple wise man.
Uh-huh.
What's even more interesting, the Oxford English Dictionary also mentions that even the original definition of philosopher or sage was actually contemptuous, or
Oh,
awfully
really?
contemptuous. Yeah, the suffix ard, which we might just think of as sort of, I don't know, a person associated with something or who does
Right.
something, that actually did originally have a negative connotation. When you think of some
I
of the
can
words,
think of a few words, right?
yeah, maybe drunkard,
Right.
braggart, sluggard, dotard. Not nice things to
Wow,
call people.
no.
And it did kind of earlier have this negative connotation of somebody who does something to excess, like a drunkard.
Oh, yeah. Drunk, or even braggart for that matter, right?
Yeah. Or someone who does something that is discreditable or not,
Okay.
not highly regarded.
Huh.
So, in other words, I think where I'm landing here is the first people who called someone wise a wizard didn't necessarily mean it in a very friendly way.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I kind of have to wonder if this is also partly what Tolkien was thinking about when he said the word was not entirely suitable. Maybe he was also thinking of the derogatory nature of the word.
Oh, a wise guy, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of.
Wise
Yeah, I
guy.
can see why he wasn't nuts about that particular aspect of the etymology.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Sean. I always love our philology fair segments. That's one of my favets. Mostly because
As
I
do
let
I.
to get you do it, and I just get to sit back and
And
listen.
I just get to go and research a bunch of stuff and talk about it. And, I love it.
I know you do. Well, I think that means it's a suitable time to get on with the discussion.
I think so.
And I think this time around, we've got you starting at the very beginning.
Because it is, in fact, as many
A
have
very good
said,
place to start.
a very good place to start. It was on May the 1st that the two came back at last to the brink of the valley of Rivendell, where stood the last, or the first, homely house. Again it was evening. Their ponies were tired, especially the one that carried the baggage, and they all felt in need of rest. As they rode down the steep path, Bilbo heard the elves still singing in the trees, as if they had not stopped since he left. And as soon as the riders came down into the lower glades of the wood, they burst into a song of much the same kind as before. This is something like it. The dragon is withered, his bones are now crumbled, his armor is shivered, his splendor is humbled. Though sword shall be rusted, and throne and crown perish with strength that men trusted and wealth that they cherish, here grass is still growing, and leaves are yet swinging, the white water flowing, and elves are yet singing, Come, tra-la-la-lally, come back to the valley. The stars are far brighter than gems without measure, the moon is far whiter than silver and treasure. The fire is more shining on hearth in the gloaming than gold won by mining, so why go a-roaming? Oh, tra-la-la-lally, come back to the valley.
Oh, tra-la-la-lally indeed.
Oh, indeed. Thank you for letting me read that one.
Of course.
I know I had to fight you for that one. I know you were
Well,
really hoping
I
to.
figured if I could take Thorin's deathbed scene, I could let you take the
You could let me
tra-la-la-la.
take the tra-la-la. You know how much I love it.
I do. And
I
really,
love
I
it.
enjoy listening to it. This is a really neat version of it.
It is a cool twist. Yeah.
Yeah, and it feels like it's a little bit more. It feels like there's a little more meaning in it than there was the first time. Maybe I'm reading more into it than I need to, but
I don't think you are. I think there's plenty to read into it in the first time around. But
sure. Oh yeah.
it's still much more frivolous and
Yeah.
and silly. Whereas
Yeah.
this one really has a strong message.
It does, and I
A
think the
strong
first one,
message
the
that's very
was,
tailored to the audience.
Exactly. The first one, the message was about the elves themselves and about their relation to nature and their kind of just who their character is and who they are. This tells a story, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think even though both versions of the poem have the same kind of, hey, stay with us, just hang out here, you've got everything you need right here, surely the elves didn't think they were actually going to do it the first time around.
Well, no.
It doesn't
book's
even
over.
right. It doesn't even cross their minds. They've got a quest to go on. Now, as they're coming back, there's a similar message, but it's more pointed because it's more targeted towards the quest that Bilbo's just been on, and you actually you could see him settling down here, as he will eventually do many years from now,
and as he wanted to do the first time they came in. To the valley. But before we get to more of the songs, I know there's a lot more to talk about the actual stanzas. There were some things about that first paragraph that were interesting. The fact that, well, just a timeline thing. Keep in mind they left the Shire in late April. What did we decide? April 28th or 26th or something like that?
Something like that, yeah. So this
Somewhere in late April. I know there were some things to talk about that early May morning, but those were wrong.
Right.
It turned out to be late April. And here they are in late June. Or I'm sorry. Not here they are. Here they are in May.
Right,
May the
beginning
1st.
of May.
But they got to Rivendell in late June of the prior year. So here we are, not quite a year later.
Right.
And yet it sounds as if the elves had never stopped singing. Now,
Isn't that cool?
Of course they had at some point, right? They had to eat.
Of course, yeah. But, you stop and think about it and you start to wonder, wow, did time actually stand still while Bilbo was gone? And of course it didn't. But when you think about what you know about the Elvish rings from Lord of the Rings, which we shouldn't know at this point yet, but
but what we do know,
but what you know about Rivendell and the
we
fact
talked
that
about how
Elrond
this is in the assimilation phase,
right?
Yeah, we're trying not to read it entirely as a
standalone,
as it was on a standalone, right?
Although we kind of go back and forth, but I like the assimilation stage because I really do want to see it in
it's part of the legendarium,
and with that in mind, you can really see sort of the preservative effect. That Elrond's ring has on Rivendell. It does. Yeah. You could imagine that they just never stopped singing. That time just completely stood still.
Absolutely. And what a song. The story. I mean, this first verse, it acknowledges the death of Smaug first, of course. But interestingly, it really sort of equates it with the world of men. It as though those two are part of the same
Throne
thing.
and crown perish with strength that men trusted,
right, and wealth that they cherish.
Yeah, it does. It's kind of like that's the stuff that they care about.
Right, and it's contrasted with this timelessness of the elves, that they're yet singing this sort of, again, they're the serial longevity, as we've said, of the elves. And it's just a really neat contrast. And again, what the elves love is the grass and the leaves and the white water and singing. And that those things are value.
And it's interesting that they use words like still and yet, which sort of underscores that idea that time is standing still here.
Indeed, that these things have been going. The grass was growing then, it's growing now.
Right.
The leaves are swinging
then. Leaves were swinging then, they're swinging now.
Yeah. Beautiful stuff.
And then the next verse with the stars comparing. So we're comparing stars to gems, the moon to silver, and then the shining fire versus gold won by mining. So there's like there's really a one-to-one correlation between these images of comfort, and I would also add images of light. Stars, moon, fire.
Stars, moon, and fire. And how they're all more desirable.
Yeah,
really.
Right.
At least from the elves' perspective.
From the elves' perspective, absolutely. They're more desirable than treasure, whether it's gems, silver, or gold. I think that's so cool.
It really is. I wonder if the Elven King would think that, given how he was never pleased with the size of his hoard.
I wonder, because
I really do like the moon, but those gems...
But those gems are very nice.
They look so good in my hair.
Well, the moonlight, it looks so nice in the gems in my hair.
That's right.
It reflects nicely.
It's really both.
It does feel like kind of a high elven thing. It kind of makes you think of Varda. Islebreth, Gilthoniel, and all that stuff.
Well, the stars, the Kindler, Varda the Kindler.
Yep.
And though we didn't read the third stanza, that's really interesting too. The question that they ask. I mean, they know the answer. Where are you going so late in returning? We know where you're going. We knew who you were when you got here. We talked about how you were too fat to fit through keyholes.
Yeah. And we know where you've been, clearly. So, why are you so late in returning,
Well, I guess they why are you so late in returning? Well, we spent Yule with Beorn. It was great.
Hung out with the bear, man. We had Christmas with a bear.
Santa Claus showed up, and then the bear mauled him.
Yeah.
So we didn't get any presents, but it was nice other than that.
Bad Baron.
Oh, goodness. And, of course, we get another lovely star reference in that third stanza, too, that the stars are all burning.
Stars are all burning.
Beautiful.
Reminds me of one of my favorite images when they were first riding in chapter 3, and the stars are burning ahead as Bilbo observed that it smelled like elves.
Yes, he did. Something you come back to often.
I do. I love it.
Elven Fragrance by Chanel.
Serial Longevity by Calvin Klein.
That's right. Oh, man. We're going to have to come up with a whole series now of a fragrance line.
And have to do the really
like
obnoxious Christmas commercials for all the different...
Oh, yeah. We're like, you've got the black and white video footage of some half-naked person who has nothing to do with the product.
Yeah. Right.
It's just, yeah.
But then you see a star shining overhead.
Yeah.
And the light reflected in a pool below. But yeah.
That is hilarious.
And we end with this image of, elf and elf maiden welcoming the weary to stay, really just kind of welcoming them to stay. Again, it's this idea that, hey, we've got everything you need right here.
I also thought it was kind of interesting. There's one line in there that I didn't want to skip over. Oh, whither so laden, so sad and so dreary. Keep in mind, they are laden. They're laden with all the gold and silver and treasure. Yeah. So.
And to the elves are viewing that as basically just a burden.
Yeah. What was that? Grani's burden, right?
Yeah, right.
Grani's burden, the kenning for gold right there.
Yep. Why are you carrying all this heavy stuff? Come hang out in the valley.
Yeah, you don't need that.
All you need is
stay
elves.
Here with the stars and the river and our singing because we're fabulous.
All you need is elves.
Do-ba-do-do-do-do. All you need is elves.
Elves are all
elves is all you need. Oh, man,
and a magic ring.
Yeah, magic ring certainly helps. There is something to say about the inclusion of these poems. Now, we've only come across one, but you all have read the chapter, presumably. I mean, if you haven't, you need to pause the show.
Go do that
read the episode and come back.
To the rest of
that's kind of part of the whole deal, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the inclusion of 3 songs in this final chapter, we looked at this. The pattern in the book seemed to be lots of kind of spontaneous songs and poems throughout. But did you notice how that almost entirely stopped when they got to the mountain? I mean,
that's true. That's really when the tone shifted to being, and you only get one, I think.
One, that was that war song,
the dwarven song. The really martial twist on the old
the
adaptation song.
Exactly, an adaptation of that first song that really is a dark and heavy sort of version. But other than that, you've got like a complete dearth of poetry for like a third of the book.
That's a good catch.
And it's really interesting. I mean, Rateliff actually suggests an idea for this. He says that the addition of the poems helps create a sense of back again by paralleling the stylistic reversion with Bilbo's return to these familiar regions. So I think he's probably right.
I think so. That makes a lot of sense. And it's really interesting to think of that in light of a really fun thing that's in the first sentence of this chapter, where it says that there stood the last or the first homely house.
Yes, depending on the direction you're going. Yeah.
Yeah, and now that he's going back, now that Bilbo's going back home, Rivendell is Elrond's house at Rivendell is the first homely house that he's going to find.
It is.
And things are going to get more homely as he gets closer. So yeah, you really do get that sense of back again.
It's really neat. It's like, now I start to see this. Now it's now comes the back again part. We started to get that, I think, at the tail end of the last chapter where he kind of looked behind him to the mountain and then looked ahead.
Yeah.
And
you see some simple creature comforts when he's actually spending Yuletide with creatures.
That's true.
And things like that. So
with bears.
But it really kind of ramps up here.
Yeah, it does pick up the pace. And in fact, and I'm going to go ahead and pick up here for a very brief section. There a warm welcome was made them, and there were many eager ears that evening to hear the tale of their adventures. Gandalf it was who spoke, for Bilbo was fallen quiet and drowsy. Most of the tale he knew, for he had been in it, and had himself told much of it to the wizard on their homeward way, or in the house of Beorn. But every now and again he would open one eye and listen, when a part of the story which he did not yet know came in. It was in this way that he learned where Gandalf had been to, for he overheard the words of the wizard to Elrond. It appeared that Gandalf had been to a great council of the White Wizards, masters of lore and good magic, and that they had at last driven the necromancer from his dark hold in the south of Mirkwood. "Ere long now," Gandalf was saying, "the forest will grow somewhat more wholesome. The north will be freed from that aura for many long years, I hope. Yet I wish you were banished from the world." "It would be well indeed," said Elrond. "But I fear that will not come about in this age of the world, or for many after." Well, fortunately, he's wrong. Later in this age.
He is very wrong, actually.
He is quite wrong.
I'm glad you pointed it out, because I was going to if you didn't.
Very pessimistic, Elrond.
Yeah.
Bad Elrond.
It's funny, because the first thing I did when I read that, I know we want to go back a little bit, but just while we're on that
Sure.
sentence, the first thing I did was go back to the first edition and see if that comment by Elrond was in the first edition, and it is. It was not. It was not something Tolkien added.
Nope.
When he figured out what Lord of the Rings was going to be about, which actually makes a lot of sense, because, as you said, Sauron does end up being banished from the world at the end of this age. So it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense to add that if he had already written Lord of the Rings.
That's true.
So it's just like you said, it's a bit of more pessimism than foreshadowing.
Exactly, it is, and I think it's well-grounded pessimism at the time of this statement, because of course the One Ring hadn't been found.
They have no reason to
believe. The only way to banish
yeah.
Sauron is to find the ring and destroy it.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, no wonder he didn't think it would happen. But the White Wizards, were you as thrown by this as I was? Because
I was quite thrown by that, yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute. I know about the White Council. What's this great council of White Wizards? Who are they?
Right, I know. Yeah, because as far as I know, there's only one White Wizard.
Yeah.
And that's Saruman. I mean, until later, I guess. At this point, there's only one White Wizard.
Well, yeah, eventually Gandalf's the White, but even then, there's only one
There's
White.
still only one White Wizard. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Also interesting that Elrond must not have been a part of this this White Council action, because Gandalf had to tell him the story.
Yeah. And it's also, I found it interesting that given how long they've been, I mean, what is this now, about 5 months that they've been on the road, that Bilbo had never been able to whittle the answer out of Gandalf? Where did you go, by the way?
That's really funny, yeah.
I'm not going to tell you.
I'm not, yeah. No time for that now.
That's right.
No time for that either. Yeah. But yeah, I don't really know what to make of the whole Council of White Wizards. I mean, I think it's just a little detail he kind of threw in here just because it was kind of fun. And then as he went back and wrote the story later, I don't know, maybe we can imagine that this is something that's sort of lost in translation. You know, maybe maybe Bilbo heard him. Yeah, maybe Bilbo
was
heard him
sleepy
talking
at the time.
That's true. Maybe he heard him talk about a White Council and he thought he heard White Wizards.
Right.
You know, or he just assumed it was a Council of White Wizards. Or maybe it's a detail that was...
Good day for a White Wizard.
Oh, wow. From the Beatles to Billy Idol.
There you
That's
go,
pretty
man.
amazing. It's like my junior high mixtape all over again.
Seriously. You're not getting anybody to go out with you with that mixtape.
No, not at all.
That ain't gonna happen.
Don't play that one in the car on the way to the dance.
No. Date ends early.
Yep. So yeah, I think it's probably just that. I think it's probably just Bilbo's lack of knowledge, or maybe even the narrator later on, who translated this from the Red Book, but probably more likely Bilbo.
That's what I'm guessing. I mean, it just, the idea that Elrond isn't involved, and the idea that there are multiple White Wizards just seems a little odd. I mean, I know we know about the Blue Wizards, what Palando and I can't remember his name. Yeah, Alatar.
Yeah.
But I'm waiting for Blanco and Vice and and all the other words.
All the other words for white in every languge that we
I was trying to think of more and I lost them. I could only come up with those two, with Spanish and German. But, couldn't remember French. I couldn't remember Italian for white, but Blanche.
Blanche the White Wizard.
Blanche. She gives up her role in the Golden Girls.
I just see this
White Wizards.
Yeah, I just see this elderly lady just kind of being very ornery with her wizard hat on.
Exactly. Oh, goodness. Well, that's going to be a long digression if we go there. So let's just move along. Nothing to see here.
Let's do that.
We have another song, and because I'm a nice guy, I've given it to you, but I've asked you to sing this to the tune of Coming Around the Mountain.
What?
Just kidding.
We did not discuss this, Mr. Sisto.
That's right. No, we didn't. No, I was teasing.
Man, that would be too funny.
No, that would be funny, but I'm not going to make you do that.
No, it will not work. We've had enough bad singing already in this episode.
Yes, we have in this entire show. I mean,
Yeah,
we're 86 episodes in. We've had plenty of bad singing.
Yeah, we're wearing out our welcome. All right. He woke to find himself in a white bed, and the moon shining through an open window. Below it, many elves were singing loud and clear on the banks of the stream. Sing all ye joyful, now sing all together. The wind's in the treetop, the wind's in the heather. The stars are in blossom, the moon is in flower, and bright are the windows of night in her tower. I will skip the next stanza and go to the third, because that's a fun one. Sing we now softly, and dreams let us weave him. Wind him in slumber, and there let us leave him. The wanderer sleepeth. Now soft be his pillow. Lullaby, lullaby, alder and willow.
I love that. They're probably not really singing very softly, are they?
No.
They're singing loud and clear, but
I think so, yeah.
I think that's rather the point. It's very ironic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trees! Hey, trees! Over there! Be quiet! This guy's sleeping!
Soft be his pillow! Guys, lullaby! Lullaby! Come on, guys.
This is definitely a comic moment, isn't it?
Yeah. Wake him up so he gets Gandalf's story right.
Good idea. Before I move on to some stuff kind of discussing the poem in general, I want to talk about some specifics. I love this line about the stars are in blossom, the moon is in flower.
Isn't that cool?
That is just awesome.
Yeah, I love, first of all, that reminds me of Telperion, actually. Remember that the moon...
That's an excellent catch.
Because the moon, remember, was actually a flower of the silver tree Telperion.
Of the silver tree.
That goes way back to the Silmarillion.
Wow, the sun and moon. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just love the idea of celestial bodies being likened to plants. It's just, a couple of things that elves love, I'll take things elves love for 300, Alex.
Ding, 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 ding. There's the daily double.
I'll bet it all.
There you go.
Now your true daily double.
This tree was the source of the moon.
This tree was the. I know. I can't do it.
What is Telperion, Alex?
Thank you.
We have a winner. All right. Olson had a great quote about this song that I want to go ahead and pull up. Again, not because he says everything better than us, but he said this better than us, so might as well point that out.
He says a lot of things better than us.
He does, actually. So he says, the primary purpose of their song is to make a joke at Bilbo's expense. They wake him up with verses about the loveliness of the night he is sleeping through and the fun of the dance he's missing out on. Then they draw attention to the fact that they have woken him up by pretending, loudly, to be putting him to sleep. They end with absurd shushing gestures to all the gentle, soothing night noises. The song is quite funny, and Bilbo takes it in the right spirit, laughing with them and teasing them back. And he does. It's awesome. I love it.
Baggins, you're missing a rager, man. Get up.
Dude, get out, man.
Oh, you sleepy? All right, go back to sleep.
Get some rest, man.
Yep.
They do talk about the trees. I think we mentioned this once before about... in that verse, we had alder and willow, but then we get pine and then oak, ash, and thorn.
Oak, ash, and thorn, yeah.
Those three in particular seem to have, I couldn't really pin it down, could you? They seem to have some sort of mythical or folklore sort of significance.
There seems to be some sort of a connection to fairy tradition, like the Celtic fairy tradition, with these three particular trees, oak, ash, and thorn. I couldn't, and thorn is another word for hawthorn, just to put that out there. Right. I couldn't really find a whole lot on it. The oldest thing that I could find, I was really looking for something that Tolkien would have been influenced by. There's a lot of newer stuff on it, but that doesn't really help us much. Not
much at all.
The oldest thing that I could find on it was there's a poem by Rudyard Kipling, which is called A Tree Song. It's part of a book he wrote called Puck of Pook's Hill.
Okay.
And that's
say
a fantasy.
That 5 times fast.
Puck of Pook's Hill, I know.
Don't say it 5 times fast, Sean. I don't want to edit. I really don't.
But that's a fantasy story that's really rooted in English fairy folklore. Yeah. Now, the problem is I don't know whether Tolkien actually... I'm guessing he probably read it. He read a lot of things that were, contemporary. But
there's no evidence of it.
There's no evidence of him having read it. There's no evidence of him having liked it or being influenced by it.
Right. There's never a mention in letters, never a mention
Right, never. Nothing at all. I couldn't find any mention of it. So, while we can probably guess maybe he read it, I don't know what that would mean. There's nothing to prove it. So
No.
all I can
It is
say is that
interesting, though,
there
that-
is some sort of a fairy connection here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting to note that oak, ash, and thorn are all also
Runes? Are you
runes,
thinking of the
thank you.
Anglo-Saxon runes? Yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah,
what
the
I'm
Futhorc
thinking
runes.
of.
Yep.
Yeah. There you go.
There are some other trees, I think, that are the names of runes, but yeah, those 3 specifically are mentioned here.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read the next little bit again. It's a fairly short passage, but it's definitely got some good humor in it. So this is basically Bilbo's response to the elves' alarm clock.
All right.
Well, merry people, said Bilbo, looking out, what time by the moon is this? Your lullaby would waken a drunken goblin, yet I thank you. And your snores would waken a stone dragon, yet we thank you, they answered with laughter. It is drawing towards dawn, and you have slept now since the night's beginning. Tomorrow, perhaps, you will be cured of weariness. A little sleep does a great cure in the house of Elrond, said he, but I will take all the cure I can get. A second good night, fair friends. And with that, he went back to bed and slept till late morning. Which I wish I could sleep till late morning, but anyway.
No kidding, right?
Weariness fell from him soon in that house, and he had many a merry jest and dance, early and late, with the elves of the valley. Yet even that place could not long delay him now, and he thought always of his own home.
Well, I guess weariness did fall from him soon if he was sleeping till late morning.
Yeah.
Through the night.
Sleeping until late morning just because somebody woke you up for 5 minutes for a song.
Right.
Yep. There's a little bit here in these last 2 lines that are really worth looking at. I think the first one is that he had this merry jest and dance. It made me remember, after Thorin died, we find that it was very long before he had the heart to make a joke again. And I think this is what we're seeing. This is his recovery from that grief.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Because we don't see anything like that in the House of Beorn. Nothing that I mean, he had a warm time there, I think was the word, that it was warm, but there was nothing about, a jest or anything like that. So
That's
I think,
true.
here he is finally.
He's finally being healed a little bit of that grief.
Yeah. The healing from that grief is happening. So that's
recovery
neat to
is a
see.
great word for it because it
That's
comes
an
straight from
excellent
on
word.
fairy stories.
Yes, it does.
And we often see this with these elvish places. We see this with
Yes.
Lothlorien and Lord of the Rings.
Oh, very much so. They're places of healing and recovery, yeah.
Yeah.
And yet, even though it is a wonderful place, he doesn't want it to delay him. He's always thinking of his house.
Yeah. Even that place, that amazing place, could not long delay him now.
Exactly. And it's a place that we all know he ends up, of course, many,
right.
many years later. But the thing that I thought was interesting was comparing this with his first visit in chapter 3. There was this line that he would gladly have stopped there forever and ever, even supposing a wish would have taken him right back to his hobbit hole without trouble. So here he was at the time being, very uncomfortable. I mean, he'd never done the worst part of his adventure. Certainly had not happened. The worst part was the trolls, and he yet to be captured by goblins or deal with Gollum or anything.
He had no way of imagining how bad the journey would get.
And yet, even then, as much as he wished for his hobbit hole, and at the beginning that was all he was thinking about all the time, that even then he would have stayed there forever, even if he could just transport himself back home. And yet now that he has experienced what he's experienced, he just can't wait to get back home. Even this place isn't enough for him.
That is an interesting change.
It really is. There's something different.
Yeah. I mean, from a narrative perspective, it's very satisfying to see the inversion now that he's heading the other direction. But it's also just, you would really think that he would just want to stay here and just rest and just enjoy this good company.
Yeah.
And part of you would expect, after seeing so much, having so much experience, that he wouldn't want to go back to the Shire. He would want to go stay out in the wide world where interesting things happen. But no, he
in
does
a
want to
safe
go
place
home.
like Rivendell.
Yeah.
All I can think of is what's his mindset then versus now, right? And back in chapter 3, it seems like he's clearly fearful of what adventures are awaiting, after the troll experience.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think we talked about how this in Rivendell, it felt like his Took side was being satisfied just by hearing these stories, by hearing about the tales of the First Age and all these heroic and epic tales. And now that he's experienced all that and his sides are more balanced, like we've been talking about lately, I feel like the Baggins is the Took is satisfied with what he's experienced, but the Baggins side will only be satisfied at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
The Baggins demand satisfaction.
I demand satisfaction.
I demand satisfaction. So, yeah, yeah. I think you're onto something there. I think that could be what's going on.
It's the only thing I can think of, really. I mean, it's such a drastic difference in how he treats Rivendell.
Yeah,
and how he wanted it to be his forever home. You know, just a
especially
year ago.
especially how we see that it will eventually become his home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once we get to Lord of the Rings, he is going to move there.
Absolutely,
so,
that's where he goes. Yeah.
So it's just we would expect to see that sooner, but no, he's got this moment where he wants to go back to the Shire, and we know he'll spend 60 years back in the Shire.
Time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, you will.
It's really cool.
And then before you read the next section, there's that little part about the gifts. I love that. That once again, Bilbo is a generous man.
The generosity.
Generous Hobbit. Yeah,
he really is.
Neat stuff.
He's the opposite of greedy. I keep coming back to that. Not only is he not greedy, he's the opposite of it. He
holds everything loosely.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he really does.
Yep.
Which is great. It's a neat example.
Yep.
But you've got the next passage here, and I'm going to let you go ahead and take it.
Okay. Even as they left the valley, the sky darkened in the west before them, and wind and rain came up to meet them. "Merry is Maytime," said Bilbo, as the rain beat into his face. "But our back is to legends, and we are coming home. I suppose this is the first taste of it." "There is a long road yet," said Gandalf. "But it is the last road," said Bilbo. They came to the river that marked the very edge of the borderland of the wild, and to the ford beneath the steep bank, which you may remember. The water was swollen, both with the melting of the snows at the approach of summer, and with the day-long rain, but they crossed with some difficulty, and pressed forward, as evening fell, on the last stage of their journey. This was much as it had been before, except that the company was smaller and more silent. Also, this time there were no trolls.
Well, there you go.
That's a good thing.
Take your wins where you can find them.
I tell you, a rainstorm with no trolls is much better than a rainstorm with trolls.
It's even better than a sunny day with trolls.
That is true. Yeah, pretty much any day with trolls is worse than any situation
any day
without trolls.
Them. Yeah, that's pretty much true. Bilbo's initial reaction to the rain, he seems a little, I don't know, just a little anxious. Like,
you think so? I don't know. I mean, I kind of see...
suppose this rain, I suppose this wind and rain, the darkened sky, this is the first taste of coming home.
Well,
a minute ago, he couldn't think of anything except going home, and now that he's actually going home, he's like, well, this is miserable.
Well, I do see what you're saying there, but he also says merry is Maytime, as the rain is beating into his face, and that strikes me as very optimistic.
I was actually hearing it more like
like sarcasm?
Merry is Maytime, but, our back is to legends and this, I was thinking of it kind of ironic, like, well, this is supposed to be a merry time, but
that's
it
interesting.
Isn't. Our back is to legends and we're going home, and this is the first taste of mundanity.
That's really interesting, because I read it exactly the opposite way. Yeah, I see like merry is Maytime as the rain beat into his face. It's just like to me, I see him so happy to be going home.
Hey, we finally disagree. Woohoo!
Yay! On something as insignificant as this.
I know.
But I imagine he feels a bit like a soldier.
Episode 86 in the pool.
We've disagreed before now.
I know.
Just usually on things that mattered more.
Right.
But no, I kind of imagined him a bit like a soldier coming back from a war, and he's just so happy to be home. And
okay.
I suppose this is the first taste of it. Yeah,
I can go either way with that.
I didn't hear any darkness in that at all. It could go either way. I don't know. Maybe we should create a poll.
I'm sure I'll lose on that one, but we want it all to be happy. But the narrator's little aside about, you may remember this ford, and then the crossing, and then the fact that, hey, there are no trolls, and that's a good thing. Yay, no trolls, yay.
And there was much rejoicing.
There was much rejoicing indeed. In an earlier manuscript, at this point in the story, Bilbo's pack pony carrying his treasures was to be swept away in the river, according to Tolkien's plot notes. All his treasure was going to be gone.
Oh, wow, I missed that. Well,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. I don't have that handy, but it was just a plot note. It never even made it into the manuscript. But
I guess maybe Tolkien was trying to have Bilbo come back a little bit more unchanged than, not come back so much richer than he was.
That's the only thing I can think of.
That's kind of a bummer, though.
Sure is. I mean, after all that work, I lose the treasure just, a few miles.
And I'm already trying to do the right thing by taking one gold chest and one silver chest, but now I'm going to lose those.
I'm even going to lose those. That's
to say nothing of the poor pony.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought about that. But anyway, thankfully Tolkien didn't go that route with it.
Yeah.
But, so they get the memory of the encounter with the trolls. They find some of the treasure there again that they had buried. I
do love that quick note that the 1 year seemed more like 10. It's just a neat detail.
Yeah, that's true.
We can certainly understand why. It's just a fun.
So much has happened.
Yeah.
I get that. I mean, I think anybody, and I know that it's been said that we rely too often on dad jokes, but anybody who is a parent realizes how quickly time can fly. The days take forever, but the years go by over like instant.
Yep.
And it's because so much happens.
Yeah,
so much happens. And of course, that's just raising kids. That's nothing to say slaying a dragon or dealing with Gollum or getting carried by eagles.
Grabbed by a dwarf and shaken from the top of a...
and being called a descendant of rats and various rabbit, insults. But yeah.
The rabbit insults were the worst, guys.
Those are the worst.
I could have tolerated everything else, but those rabbit insults.
Yeah, you can threaten to eat me in the bottom of the cave in the middle of the Misty Mountains.
Yeah.
But stop calling me.
Don't call me a rabbit, okay? I'm not a rabbit.
I'm just tired of that. But they do dig up the treasure, and interestingly, Bilbo's like, I don't need this. You'd better take this. But they do end up sharing it. Pony's not very pleased. Granny's burden again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, and then the interesting little note about the fact that not one of his pocket handkerchiefs had made it.
That's really awesome.
This was one of Elrond's. I love it.
I especially love that because the pocket handkerchief was such a great symbol of the comfort that he was leaving behind, when he left home without them.
And like Hobbit decency,
really cool.
We do things the right way. We make sure we have pocket handkerchiefs.
Right, that's true.
Yeah, great moment there. But I actually am going to go ahead and read this third poem that shows up in this chapter.
You've got the good one.
Oh, come on.
They're all good. No, they're all good. But this is
I gave you Tra-la-la-lally, dude.
You gave me Tra-la-la-lally twice.
Yeah, that's right.
No, this is a good one, and I'm looking forward to it. So
yeah. As all things come to an end, even this story, a day came at last when they were in sight of the country where Bilbo had been born and bred, where the shapes of the land and of the trees were as well known to him as his hands and toes. Coming to a rise, he could see his own hill in the distance, and he stopped suddenly and said, "Roads go ever, ever on, over rock and under tree, by caves where never sun has shone, by streams that never find the sea. Over snow by winter sown, and through the merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, and under mountains in the moon. Roads go ever, ever on, under cloud and under star, yet feet that wandering have gone turn at last to home afar. Eyes that fire and sword have seen, and horror in the halls of stone, look at last on meadows green and trees and hills they long have known." Gandalf looked at him. "My dear Bilbo," he said, "something is the matter with you. You are not the hobbit that you were." Indeed, he's not.
Not at all.
Not even close. Though it's interesting that Gandalf says something's the matter with you. Like it's a bad thing that he's different, but yeah.
I think it's probably just Gandalf being a little sarcastic, a little ironic.
Snide. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's such a beautiful poem.
It really, really is. And even then, though, it's not really sung about home, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, and that makes sense because the first line is about roads. Roads go ever, ever on. And I know, you've got some stuff on this, but before we jump into that, I can't help, pointing out that, in this book, the poem actually talks about plural roads. Roads go ever, ever on.
As opposed to the road goes ever
on and on, which is in Fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked about that. Was it Tolkien Reading Day?
Tolkien Reading Day. Mm-hmm.
2017.
Yeah, I don't know if it was... Yeah, it wasn't this year. It would have been 2017 because that was poetry was
That was
the theme
poetry.
for that year.
Yep. Yeah. But if folks haven't
We looked
listened
at
to
all
that
the
episode,
versions.
yeah,
Mhm.
and we compared them, and that was a fun discussion. And you really
That
do
was.
see the change. And
Yeah.
and I just think we'll probably talk about this more when we get to Fellowship. But
Yeah.
it's just
and
worth
we'll get to
noting
this
that
song in Fellowship relatively early, too.
yeah, but it's worth noting that although since this is a song about the journey,
Yes.
he is talking about the multiple roads that he walks.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is kind of a rehash of all the things that he did, over rock and under
Yeah.
a tree,
Yeah.
by caves, by streams, over snow. This is his tale.
Yeah.
And yet, like he says, yet feet that wandering have gone turn at last to home afar. So he does know that eventually that road or those roads
Will lead
are
him back
going
home.
to lead him back home.
Mm-hmm. And he'll finally get to look again at these meadows green, which contrasts so nicely with the halls of stone, the horror in the halls of stone versus these familiar meadows green.
The trees and hills, the green meadows.
It's so cool.
It makes me want to see the Shire so badly.
Yeah,
It really does.
yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about some potential inspirations.
Some fun
for
bones.
This.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to get into the bones a little bit. In discussing this song of Bilbo's, Rateliff gives us the text of a short poem that Tolkien's friend and fellow TCBS member G.B. Smith wrote. It's the first of two Songs on the Downs, both of which are included in A Spring Harvest. That's a book of Smith's poetry that Tolkien himself edited in 1918 after Smith died in the Battle of the Somme. And it's a very short one. It's only 2 stanzas. I'm going to go ahead and read both. This is the road the Romans made, this track half lost in the green hills, or fading in a forest glade mid violets and daffodils. The years have fallen like dead leaves, unwept, uncounted, and unstayed, such as the autumn tempest thieves, since first this road the Romans made. It's, it's a road song. I mean, roads are going to be a common thing, but of course he was very close with G.B. Smith.
Right.
And there's some similarities here in terms of the time, the passage of time and things like that.
Yeah, there's a real sense of just the history of the land around him.
Yeah.
That's a really cool poem.
I love it.
And I also noticed that Rateliff also pointed out an even closer parallel with a poem by a poet named E.F.A. Geach, a poem she wrote in 1918, which was called Romance. Actually ended up being printed in a volume of poems for children in, I think, 1922.
Yep, I think so.
And it was actually published alongside Tolkien's poem Goblin Feet, which we've talked about
the one he
before.
didn't like. Yeah,
the one
he wished he
the
never
one he
wrote.
disavowed later in life.
Yes.
And as a result, Rateliff believes that Tolkien probably was aware of this poem and may have been inspired by it. So,
almost certainly was aware of it because it was on the page immediately following Tolkien's
That's right.
Goblin Feet.
That's right.
It was
You're
like
right
on the
about
next
that.
page.
Yeah. Yeah. So he would have seen it. And folks, you can listen to this and you be the judge on whether Tolkien was inspired by this.
Mm-hmm.
Round the next corner and in the next street, adventure lies in wait for you. Oh, who can tell what you may meet round the next corner and in the next street? Could life be anything but sweet when all is hazardous and new? Round the next corner and in the next street, adventure lies in wait for you.
I like that. That's intriguing. That certainly does sound like it had some inspirational quality to this.
It does, especially when you read it like that instead of singing it to the tune of Down on the Corner by Creedence Clearwater Revival. Because it is very tempting to do that, and I will not.
Please, by all means,
disparage this poem by singing "Round
I
the
will
next
pay
corner
you.
and in the next street." Oops, I just did.
Don't stop!
I'm not sure how to scan the next line. Adventure lies and wait for you. Who can tell what you may meet? It actually works really well.
It does actually.
Apologies to E.F.A. Geach. It's actually a lovely poem.
It is a lovely
But
poem.
I just
and apologies to the surviving members of Creedence Clearwater Revival for that matter. But
no kidding.
That's awesome. I love that. It also has a little bit of a Dr. Seuss, the places you'll go feel to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Oh, who can tell what you may meet around the next corner and in the next. It does have kind of a sing-songy Seuss quality to it.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Oh man, sorry.
Shake you a little bit. Yeah,
your singing is that was awesome. I love that.
Thank you.
That comment about him not being the Hobbit that you were really was, well, I mean, obviously true, but it brings in an interesting tidbit from our favorite Tolkien letter, the one we have apparently tattooed on the inside of our eyelids, letter number 151. If we do, it's in very, very tiny print, and it hurt a lot, believe me.
Oh, yes.
In it, Tolkien expresses his thoughts on this theme in the story, the idea that Bilbo is different. So these are Tolkien's own words. This is a study of simple, ordinary man, neither artistic nor noble and heroic, but not without the undeveloped seeds of these things, against a high setting. And in fact, as a critic has perceived, the tone and style change with the Hobbit's development, passing from fairy tale to the noble and high, and relapsing with the return. Well, Anderson goes on to reference that letter in the Annotated Hobbit. And he believes, and I think he's probably right, that the critic Tolkien is referring to in that thing about that the critic has perceived this is none other than C.S. Lewis. And so he actually quotes Lewis' review in part as saying that the typical formulaic children's stories of the time wouldn't, and now I'm quoting, prepare us for the matter-of-fact beginnings of the story to the saga-like tone of the later chapters. You must read for yourself to find out how inevitable the change is and how it keeps pace with the hero's journey. So, yeah, I think C.S. Lewis was definitely the critic that Tolkien was referencing in 151, but this idea that the change from the basic fairy tale to this noble and high and then kind of coming back. Yeah.
It's like a there and back again of tone, from sort of childish and fairy tale to the Beowulf dragon episode and the greed and all that really Germanic stuff. And then back to this simple fairy tale.
Traditional fairy tale.
Yeah. And we'll see that again with Lord of the Rings.
Oh, we will, for sure.
As we start in sort of that fairy tale realm, there's this first couple of chapters of Lord of the Rings that it really disorients longtime readers. A lot of people struggle with the fact that the first couple of chapters of Lord of the Rings are very fairy tale-ish, and you've got the talking fox and stuff like that.
Right.
Which I don't have a problem with, but a lot of people do.
One of my favorite moments, actually.
Yeah.
It's one of those small little charming
it's great,
touches.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. But Lord of the Rings quickly passes from that fairy tale to the very noble and high.
The grand epic and
And it never comes quite back, does it?
No, and I think that's rather the point. I think that's rather the point because, Bilbo was able to return to this sort of fairy story setting in this life.
Right.
But we know, for example, that
Frodo
the
is
four
not.
travelers, especially Frodo, their change is different. Yeah. Especially Frodo. His change is permanent.
Frodo is the most. Sam is sort of in the middle. Merry and Pippin, the least.
Yeah.
They kind of come back to
they're changed physically, of course, thanks to the end drafts. But and that's given them stature, not just physically, but in terms of like presence and leadership. But Frodo's role, it's he doesn't get to come back to that fairy tale. He stays in that noble and high, and it's a sad,
and it's very sad.
For him.
It is a sacrifice for him.
We'll get to that in about 4 years,
at least.
Oh man, if not longer. You're right. Oh goodness, it's going to be a long, fun road.
It will go ever on and on, one could say.
Yes, it will. The podcast that goes ever on and on.
Yeah. That's what we should have called ourselves.
I know. The podcast goes ever on and on.
Yeah.
Oh, well. Live and learn.
Yep.
Our next show.
After we're finished with Lord of the Rings and we refuse to stop doing this podcast, we'll start.
Exactly. Don't let our wives hear us say the next show. That's not a phrase that they're going to want to hear. All right, let me have you tell us a little bit about this really untimely auction.
All right. And so they crossed the bridge and passed the mill by the river, and came right back to Bilbo's own door. "Bless me, what's going on?" he cried. There was a great commotion, and people of all sorts, respectable and unrespectable, were thick round the door, and many were going in and out, not even wiping their feet on the mat, as Bilbo noticed with annoyance.
Oh, my goodness.
I know. If he was surprised, they were more surprised still. He had arrived back in the middle of an auction. There was a large notice in black and red hung on the gate, stating that on June the 22nd, Messrs. Grubb, and Burrows would sell by auction the effects of the late Bilbo Baggins, Esquire, of Bag End, Underhill, Hobbiton. Sale to commence at 10 o'clock sharp. It was now nearly lunchtime, and most of the things had already been sold, for various prices from next to nothing to old songs, as is not unusual at auctions. Bilbo's cousins, the Sackville-Bagginses, were, in fact, busy measuring his rooms to see if their own furniture would fit. In short, Bilbo was presumed dead, and not everybody that said so was sorry to find the presumption wrong.
Oh, that last line is just, that's just
a
wrong.
little knife in the heart there. You know, it's like,
You're not
dude.
kidding. And it kind of tells you that no matter how much you like this kind of idyllic rural setting of the Shire and how everything must just be peaceful, that's nasty. There's some really nasty people there.
There is some nasty small-mindedness to the
Yes.
hobbits, and we'll get into that with Chapter 1 of Fellowship, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because Tolkien had some words in one of his letters.
Well, I think we talked about it before.
Yeah, I think we did.
The
didn't we?
negative impacts of that provincialism.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we talked about it on Tolkien Reading Day.
Probably.
About how, you know, the folks in Bag End had one, or in
They're
Hobbiton had one
small-minded.
view.
Yeah.
And then the folks like Farmer Maggot had a totally different view.
Right. Yeah, and the
neither
other
really admired the other.
the other is somebody just right across the road, basically,
Right,
as opposed
right.
to, you know, it's just it's a luxury of a small worldview.
Luxury. Wow, that's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. But I think Tolkien actually had some words on this in one of his letters that I think we'll have to pull up when we get to
I think we
Fellowship.
will.
That, you
When
know,
we get
he
there.
talked about, you know, as much as he talks about how he himself is a hobbit and very hobbity, there are some things about them that he's not crazy about,
Yeah.
and that he doesn't portray as a good thing.
Exactly.
This is
Things he does
clearly
not
one
say
of them.
are admirable. Yeah, you're right. This is clearly
This
one
is
of them.
clearly hobbits at their worst, and yet
This
it's still such
pettiness.
a
it is.
funny passage, though. I mean,
It's
just the
hilarious. There's
officiousness
so
of
many funny
the
things.
Mrs. Grubb and Burrows, you know.
Mrs. Grove. I love that. What a name for a law firm.
I
mean,
love that name. Actually, Douglas Anderson pointed out, Tolkien actually pointed this out in Nomenclature of Lord of the Rings, but I found the footnote in Anderson's book. He said that grub was meant to recall the English verb grub, dig, root,
Right.
you know, dig in the ground. And so combine that with
burrows.
burrows. They're all very hobbity, very hole-dwellery
yeah.
kinds of names. But then Anderson had this awesome little observation. He said, yet one also detects Tolkien's wry smile in using them as names for lawyers.
Oh, yes. I think we do.
So you got this image of money grubbers, you know,
Grub, and Burrows.
digging in the dirt, you know.
It's sort of like the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Right.
mean, it's just, this is definitely a slam on lawyers, and it's very funny.
Yeah, quite.
I love the Bagginsy moment. Oh, my goodness. They're not even wiping their feet on the mats.
I know. Isn't that
Bilbo,
great?
they're selling you all the stuff in your house, and you're worried.
But it's like you're worried about them tracking mud in the house. I know.
The house that's about to be auctioned off.
Yeah. It's right. It's not going to be
well,
your
I guess
job
the
to
house
clean
isn't
it
going to be
soon.
auctioned. All the stuff is auctioned off, and the house just goes to the next
To the
next heirs, which are the
Sackville-Bagginses.
Sackville-Bagginses.
Yeah. Yeah.
The pettiness, though, I love this. I mean, his return. You know, we talked about the kind of the attitude of provincialism and kind of the pettiness of the hobbits. But this is also a little bit about how his return sort of upsets their ordered world. If somebody's dead, how dare you? You need to stay dead.
Yeah, yeah. You can almost see them like watching Bilbo marching up the street and going, "No, what are you doing back? Why are you alive?" You know?
Yeah, you
You
can't
can't
do
be
that.
alive.
You're
And
dead.
Well, and of course the Sackville-Bagginses never did believe that he was
No,
the real
this
Bilbo.
is a fake Bilbo.
Like he's a changeling or something. Yeah.
Fake Bilbo. Totally fake.
Hashtag
Really
fake
sad.
Bilbo. Hashtag fake Bilbo.
Hashtag fake Bilbo.
Man, sad.
Ah.
I got.
Well,
I got
you know, if they can fake the moon landing, they can fake Bilbo's return.
that's true.
Sorry. Oh goodness.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got a little more word nerdery here on Sackville-Baggins because I love this name.
Good. I know. It
It's just it's a fun name, the Sackville-Bagginses.
is.
Again,
It doesn't ever sound complimentary, does it?
no,
It's
doesn't.
never like, oh,
It
the
sounds-
Sackville-Bagginses.
It sounds pretentious, and I don't
does.
say that just because it has nothing to do with the fact that it's hyphenated.
No.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Plenty
but
of
it's just-
hyphenated names.
Plenty of great hyphenated names, but it's just so long. It's just like Baggins is so down to earth, and then the Sackville-Bagginses, you know?
Those Bagginses.
Yeah. Actually, so Tolkien did point out, again, this is in Nomenclature of the Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
Of course, Sackville is chosen because of the similar meaning between sack and bag.
Right.
So Tolkien is deliberately trying to achieve a slightly comic effect, he said, with this conjunction.
Okay. I buy that.
And it works, sack, bag.
Right.
But Tom Shippey in The Road to Middle-earth actually took this a step further.
Uh-huh.
I think we talked many episodes ago, probably when we talked about Chapter 1, we talked about the pun of Bag End being an English translation.
That might have even been in our intro episode.
It might have been, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we talked about how Bag End is a translation of cul-de-sac, which is what we call it in America.
Yeah.
But Shippey says that the word cul-de-sac in and of itself has its origins in snobbery.
Snobbery?
Yeah. And this is in The Road to Middle-earth. And there's got like a couple of pages on this idea of Frenchified, that's his word, Frenchified words being better than English words. He says it's something that's as old as the Norman invasion. When these French-speaking Normans came in, and they were they were the nobles, they were the ruling class at that point. So that created this tradition where Frenchified words just sound more elevated than English words to certain people. And Shippey actually points out that the Sackville-Bagginses have given over to this kind of snobbery. And this is a great quote. He says they've severed their connection with Bag End by calling it cul-de-sac and tagging on the French suffix ville.
Ville.
So think of the Sackville-Bagginses as these sort of like pretentious Frenchified hobbits. And
that is comedy gold.
You get a great image there.
Yes, you do. I love that. I absolutely love that. I've got to find that passage in Shippey, no doubt.
It's somewhere in Road to Middle-earth. It's the chapter called, I think, the Bourgeois Burglar, I think is what it's called.
Oh yeah.
So check that one out.
It's been a while since I've read Road. I read Author not too long ago, Author of the Century, but Road to Middle-earth, I admit, is a little harder to read for me.
Yeah.
Especially because he starts out at the very beginning with some stuff from Old English. Looking at runes and going.
He definitely puts you in the deep end.
Yeah, he does. He kind of throws you in there with no water wings, man.
Yeah.
Come on, help me out a little bit.
But it is a a great book and highly recommended.
It is a great book. Really phenomenal book.
The other thing I always think of with the Sackville-Bagginses is I had a friend in high school. We read Lord of the Rings at the same time, and this was probably like, I don't know, 10th grade, 11th grade, something like that. I was 15 or 16, okay. And a friend of mine was reading it, and he saw. You know how a couple of times in Fellowship, Sackville-Baggins is abbreviated SBs, the SBs?
Yeah.
I had a friend who read that and didn't realize that was an abbreviation of their surname. He thought that Tolkien was using that as short for something else.
Some sort of derogatory?
Yeah. The SBs want the house, like that kind of thing.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I don't think that's quite what he had in mind. Oh, my goodness.
And I always think of that with the Sackville-Bagginses.
Oh, no.
I hope my friend is
hilarious. Listening. That's good stuff. Well, I guess if you're going to make a mistake in interpreting it, that's a pretty funny one to make.
That's a fun one to make. It's a good teenage way to read it. Like, dude, he called them SBs. Like, no, he didn't. That's just
no way, dude.
Yep.
So, and then we get the spoons. We're not going to read all that, but this whole thing about the spoons and how he suspected the Sackville-Bagginses, and of course, why wouldn't they? I mean, they're just...
Of course, yeah.
But then the bit that you mentioned earlier that they think that this is a fake Bilbo. Hashtag fake Bilbo. Don't believe the mainstream Bilbo.
The mainstream Hobbit media.
That's right. Sad. I'm sorry.
We're cracking ourselves up here.
We really are. I did think there was one line I have to admit that did remind me of something we just recently read. The fact that he had to purchase back his own furniture, he had to buy it all back. It makes me think of Thorin's line about not having to purchase that which was his own. I mean, it's a much lighter comic setting, but it's the same thing.
That is interesting.
And now he has to give a 14th of his treasure to get what's his back.
That's a really good point. I mean, you think about how much Thorin was, complaining about that prospect.
Yeah.
And Bilbo just does it without
even
really
thinking. Just
thinking
like, all right, fine. I mean, he's got plenty. I think we discussed last time just how flippin' rich he is now.
Yeah. And again, he's the opposite of greedy.
He is, exactly. Everything he holds loosely in his hands. It's just not that big. Until the ring, but that's a whole other story, and there's a reason for that. All right. Well, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and read this next section about what he has lost other than spoons. Oh, I love this line.
All right.
Indeed, Bilbo found he had lost more than spoons. He had lost his reputation. It is true that forever after he remained an elf friend, and had the honor of dwarves, wizards, and all such folk as ever passed that way. But he was no longer quite respectable. He was, in fact, held by all the hobbits of the neighborhood to be queer, except by his nephews and nieces on the Took side, but even they were not encouraged in their friendship by their elders. I'm sorry to say he did not mind. He was quite content, and the sound of the kettle on his hearth was ever after more musical than it had been even in the quiet days before the unexpected party. His sword he hung over the mantelpiece. His coat of mail was arranged on a stand in the hall, until he lent it to a museum. His gold and silver was largely spent in presents, both useful and extravagant, which to a certain extent accounts for the affection of his nephews and nieces. I always remember the good gifts, you know?
Oh, yeah. He was that uncle.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that uncle. Yeah, cool. I hope he's coming to my birthday party. His magic ring he kept a great secret, for he chiefly used it when unpleasant callers came. He took to writing poetry and visiting the elves, and though many shook their heads and touched their foreheads and said, "Poor old Baggins," and though few believed any of his tales, he remained very happy to the end of his days, and those were extraordinarily long.
That's so cool.
I love that. I really do. That whole paragraph is just full of, well, two, is just full of awesome.
Yeah.
You know, this idea that he's lost his reputation, this isn't something new. This is something we learned all the way back at the beginning of the story, where the narrator says he may have lost the neighbor's respect, but he gained, well, you'll see whether he gained anything in the end.
That's right. Yep.
And here we are, full circle. Now we see that he has indeed lost their respect, something he was very concerned about when he left.
That's true. But now
he took comfort in the fact that he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf. I remember that.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
But now all sorts of things.
Now it doesn't bother him at all. He doesn't.
No, not at all.
He doesn't care. He didn't mind.
He's precisely zero concern about that lost respect.
Yeah.
I mean, he is just don't care.
And I love the way the narrator frames it. The narrator says, "I am sorry to say he did not mind." There's some sarcasm in that.
A little funny. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's sarcasm. I think the narrator is, you know, he's right there with Bilbo in saying that the respect of those people.
I'm sorry
really
to
didn't
say
matter.
that.
No, exactly.
It's definitely
he gets
not.
it.
Yeah, he does. He does. The sound of the kettle on his hearth. That's I love that little bit.
Really speaks to the contentment that he feels. Yeah.
It really does.
The simple homey pleasures that he's come back to.
And how they're richer now because of what he's experienced. Because it's compared to the quiet days before the unexpected party, where he was certainly content then. You know, Bilbo pre-party, if you could have spoken to him then, he would have said, "Of course I'm content." In fact, he was so content he didn't even want to go on the adventure. And now he's more content because of the adventure.
And he hears the music. That's true, yeah. And now that he's gone on this adventure, he hears the music in the kettle. That reminds me a little bit of Smith, Wooten, Major, which I know we've never talked about in detail, and a lot of our listeners haven't read. But there's a connection there with with a character who comes back from an adventure and he finds himself singing while he works and things like that. That's really cool.
That is cool. And then we get a little kind of, inventory of his treasures, right? Sting is hanging over the mantelpiece, which, well, that's an unfortunate place for poor Mr. Sumner, but... Yeah,
it's really hard to go on tour when you're hanging on the mantelpiece.
Exactly. And then the mithril coat, which ends up in the Matham house, the gold and silver, and the ring. So we find out all of, what happened to all of those things. But it's that last bit about how he remained very happy to the end of his days, and those were extraordinarily long.
It's such a great take on the classic fairy tale ending. Yeah. The happily ever after. It's a way of saying happily ever after without having to use the
trope, right?
The trope language. But what's also interesting about this sentence is, do you remember the letter that Tolkien wrote to Allen and Unwin when they asked him for a sequel to The Hobbit? It was letter
not off
30.
the top of my head, but
it was. What is wrong with you? You don't remember? How do you not have all of the letters memorized?
Oh man, don't I wish?
But letter 31. This is to C.A. Firth, who was one of the gentlemen who worked at Allen and Unwin. And basically, they had asked for a sequel to The Hobbit, and Tolkien gave a bunch of reasons why he wasn't really interested in going back to Hobbits. And he said, for one thing, the original Hobbit was never intended to have a sequel. Bilbo remained very happy to the end of his days, and those were extraordinarily long. A sentence I find an almost insuperable obstacle to a satisfactory link.
An almost insuperable obstacle. I
know,
that.
It's such a great way of saying, like, I said he remained happy to the end of his days. How am I supposed to send him into peril?
Yeah, I can't get around that.
Right, which is true, but, you just have to give your hero a relative, I guess. But
I guess. Maybe a A nephew.
Maybe a nephew, cousin.
Cousin, I think, right?
A cousin, literally a cousin, but he called him nephew at one point, didn't he?
I know. I can't remember now which he actually is, but I think it's actual cousin. But yeah, he called him a nephew. Well, whatever it is, he ends up being an heir.
Yes.
Officially, but
right.
Yeah, I love that last little paragraph.
It's cool.
There.
It's really cool.
Beautiful stuff. But you've got kind of the transition into the epilogue, if you will.
All right. One autumn evening, some years afterwards, Bilbo was sitting in his study, writing his memoirs. He thought of calling them There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Holiday, when there was a ring at the door. It was Gandalf and a dwarf, and the dwarf was actually Balin. Come in, said Bilbo, and soon they were settled in chairs by the fire. If Balin noticed that Mr. Baggins's waistcoat was more extensive and had real gold buttons, Bilbo also noticed that Balin's beard was several inches longer, and his jeweled belt was of great magnificence. They fell to talking of their times together, of course, and Bilbo asked how things were going in the lands of the mountain. It seemed they were going very well.
Oh, what a moment. I love the gold buttons as opposed to the brass buttons that he lost in the mountain.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
so cool.
He's richer. He can afford the gold buttons.
Yeah. And it is a little bit larger waistcoat.
A little bit more extensive, yeah.
But that's
He's put on a few pounds.
Balin's beard
has gotten longer. He's a little older, and
he's richer
He's a little richer with his jeweled belt. Yep.
I love that. Yeah, sadly, my waistcoat is a little more extensive than it was when I was
Dude,
younger.
You're not the only one. Hey, that's everybody.
It happens. No real gold buttons though. No.
I don't have Dragon Horde money.
No. News of the Lands.
I love
News
this.
of the Lands.
Yeah, you get this. You really see the restoration of that region. We talked about this. In the last chapter, and you really see the peace, the friendship, and just
and the resultant prosperity.
Yeah, exactly.
That's resultant from that. That's the whole point. Is it's more prosperous, but it's prosperous precisely because
of the peace and friendship.
Exactly. So Dale is rebuilt by Bard. We're not going to read all that, but the valley's rich, the desolation's gone. This is just some years afterward.
Mm-hmm.
So it's already kind of the land itself is healed.
Yeah.
Lake Town 3, as archaeologists would call it.
Our archaeological metaphor that we've been going
exactly.
back to. Yeah.
It's been founded and they're doing well.
And wealth going up and down the running river. I like that.
Yeah, up and down because
everybody
trade is...
Yeah, trade is good and everybody is benefiting from it.
Everybody benefits. And there was friendship between elves and dwarves and men. That's such an important line.
That's significant. That is very significant.
Really significant. And something that, again, reminds us of what we talked about just last episode before, about the eucatastrophe of the arrival of the Goblin army.
Goblins.
Because that's what stopped the war between dwarves and men.
Right. Yep.
We also get the death of the old master, that he ends up dying of starvation after taking the gold and falling under the dragon sickness.
Mm-hmm. Deserted by his companions, which I think is also significant.
It is very significant. It's interesting, though, that it's the first time that the phrase dragon sickness is used. So even though we've talked about it at length, at great length, this is actually the first time we see the thing identified, and it's called dragon sickness.
Yeah. And I get the sense that it's almost like a joking use of it here, because I don't know, the master has always been greedy, and to think of him falling, I don't know that he really fell under the dragon sickness so much as he just kind of found an opportunity and took it.
He kind of did what he would do.
He kind of did what he would. He kind of did him. You do you, master.
You do you, dude.
And that's just what he did. I don't know. I kind of see it as a little bit of an ironic use of the term. I could be wrong there, but
I think it's we get that he easily catches this disease because of his natural greed, because of inherent greedy nature.
That's a good
because
point.
this is actually dragon gold. This is from the hoard that Bard had been given to help the lake people. He gives it to the master to help them. He takes that gold, and so he's got with him gold.
He's got this dragon brooded gold. Yeah, you could be right about that. Yeah.
And deserted by his companions. You're right. I think hitting on that really touches on this idea of the dragon sickness isolating people. We saw what it did to Thorin.
Yes, exactly.
And that's, I think, another echo of that.
Yep, I agree.
Died of starvation in the waste.
Dying of starvation seems sort of a
pretty fitting way
end for the master.
Remember when Bard said, or well, that wasn't Bard, but Bard's messenger had said to Thorin, "You may eat your gold, if you will," or something like that.
Yeah,
and that's kind of where he ends up.
Yeah,
and
think of how well fed he was when he was the master.
Oh yes, quite.
How he never had to go without anything.
No, even when the people did. But the new master is great. Balin talks about how, he's very popular. He is wiser, but he gets most of the credit for the. It's kind of like the president always gets credit for the stock market.
The case. Yeah, like, even if it's something that took years to
good or bad.
Yeah,
there's too much blame and too much credit for somebody who's got nothing to do with the stock market. Well, very little to do with it. And it's the same thing here. I mean, the prosperity is because you've got elves, dwarves, and men, working together. You've got trade. So let's not credit, the new master too much.
And now they're making songs that say that, it's because of him that the rivers run with gold. In his day,
the rivers run with gold.
Those Lake Towners love to make those songs.
Boy, they sure do.
The Golden Rivers.
The Golden Rivers. And they also continue a tradition, not just of singing songs about gold and prophecy, but of having an elected official.
Yeah.
That leads us to the last passage in the book.
The last in the book. Yeah. Kind of sad here.
Very sad.
Not because of the passage, but just because it's the last one.
It's the end.
It's the end of a long road for us.
It really is. It's been a wonderful road, and I love it. But all roads must come to an end, as Bilbo said. So here we go. Then the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true after a fashion, said Bilbo. Of course, said Gandalf. And why should not they prove true? Surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies, because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? You're a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you. But you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world, after all. Thank goodness, said Bilbo, laughing, and handed him the tobacco jar.
It's a great ending.
Oh, I love that.
It is such a happy, homey ending. They're just
perfect ending.
They're back where they started, right here at Bilbo's house. Just
Tolkien does that. The way he ends his tale, I still think that the ending of Well, I'm Back is one of the best endings ever.
Yeah,
despite what people say. I know some people don't like it, but this is a phenomenal ending for this book. It's perfect.
It is a pitch perfect ending. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And of course, it brings in one of the major themes that we've talked about, this whole idea that fate and free will and that combination of things, I love what Gandalf says. This idea that a hand was involved, that there was a superior force involved in bringing about these things, your escapes and some of those incredible moments that we'll be talking about in next episode in our retrospective. That they weren't just for Bilbo's benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They were related to the prophecies and the fulfillment of those prophecies.
Yeah. And what I love about that is that it underscores the fact that, Bilbo did make all these choices along the way, and all these choices led him to the fulfillment of the prophecy. It's just...
Absolutely.
That's just the way it works, folks. You have, the fate, there's fate. It is fated to happen, but people... Players in this cosmic drama, as Tolkien's called it, I think in one or two places, they have to take agency. They have to do
absolutely.
They have to make their
own
choices.
The end result may be something that is part of Iluvatar's plan, but the little steps along the way, he can change it if you don't want to go along with it.
Yeah. And Bilbo says, "Oh, this the songs have turned out to be true after a fashion." It's not just true after a fashion; it's true in the only way that it could happen.
Yeah, the only way it could ever have happened. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, it is the only way it could have ever happened because this is how it was fated to happen. This is how, this is it, man.
Yeah. And the whole thing about that is a reminder of their role in it. Bilbo would have every right to feel that he is a hero, that he did an amazing thing, or actually several amazing things. And he did do amazing things, and he's certainly the hero of the story in a literary sense. But he doesn't let this get to his head. No,
that's true.
And a lot of this, I think, is the recognition that because these things happened, from an outside agency, from a Iluvatar in this case, and for the benefit of all of Middle-earth, he recognizes that his is a smaller place. Gandalf reminds him, right? I mean, this is definitely a funny way of saying to Bilbo, remember your place. Just a reminder that
you're quite a little fellow in a wide world.
You're only quite a little fellow in a wide world, after all. It's a reminder that humility and kind of accepting and understanding your own role in the world is really essential. And Bilbo's cool with that.
He is totally cool with it.
He's more than cool with it. He's pleased.
He is. He's thank goodness. He's actually happy about it.
I don't want to be more than that.
And why not? Because that is a heroic thing to be. That is a great thing to be. I mean, that reminds me of the words of Elrond at the council in Fellowship of the Ring, where he says, "Yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere."
Yeah.
And Tolkien also mentioned this concept in the Milton Waldman letter 131.
131.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's just the way the world works. Sometimes it is the small who move the wheels of the world. That doesn't make the deed less significant. It just means that they had a part to play. And I think that's super cool. And as you say, Bilbo is more than okay with that. He
loves it. He's laughing, and I love that the very last thing he does is a homey thing. He hands Gandalf the tobacco jar.
Yep.
Which takes us all the way back to the first when he says to Gandalf to sit down and have a smoke with him, you know?
Yep. They're right back where they started. Right. Completely changed, but right back where they started.
I don't want to end the story.
I know.
Oh, man.
I know, but I think
it is over.
We have come to the end.
We have indeed.
Yep.
Well, this may not be as bad as auctioning off all your neighbor's possessions while he's on vacation. But thanks to modern technology, we have learned that some of you, you over there with the earbuds, and the red shirt, that some of you turn out for a few minutes after our chapter discussion. This time we're asking you to please not do that. We not only do we have great stuff in the bag coming up, but we have an important announcement to make that we want to make sure you hear.
That's right. And obviously, we've just finished The Hobbit. And if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that our next episode is going to be the retrospective, where we'll take a look back at some of the more important themes in the book, as well as doing our best to clear out the mailbag before we start season 3.
A lot of that. And then a week after that is when we'll be at Mythmoot 5, which we'll be recording and releasing on the podcast feed as episode 88.
And following that, we're going to be releasing the next Questions After Nightfall episode. So once again, we'll be joined by several of our listeners. We'll do a live recorded Q&A. And we may have one other little surprise after that.
We very well may.
And then, what's next?
Yeah, well, first off, we just want to promise that we are not going anywhere. I think we've talked about this. We have a huge job ahead of us, though, in tackling The Lord of the Rings. And we really, really want to get this right.
Yeah.
As much as we love doing our weekly episodes, this kind of intense schedule hasn't left us a lot of time for planning out our approach or doing anything else to help us prepare for that incredibly daunting project.
Yeah, and there are also a few other things that we want to get in place for season 3 that we haven't had a chance to really focus on.
Yeah, or even consider.
And as Alan said, I mean, we're happy to do it. More than happy to do it.
More than happy, right.
But we do also want to continue to make the show better and make sure we're giving you the best Tolkien podcast that we can.
Absolutely. So after Mythmoot and after we release a couple of other things we've got in the works, we'll be taking a brief hiatus during the summer. Now, it's not going to be too long, just a few weeks. We plan to be back to start season 3 sometime around mid-August. After all, it's the job that's never started as takes longest to finish, as my old gaffer used to say.
That's right. But don't worry, while we're off, I think we said this last episode too, while we're off, we're still going to be around on social media. Right. Parliament's still going to be bringing the mail, and we will still be working on the podcast.
Yes.
We're just going to be doing some behind-the-scenes things to make things even better for season 3.
That's right. And in fact, we're planning on doing the same thing between each season going forward. Not only is that going to help us keep things fresh and entertaining and, as entertaining as we can be, it'll give us a chance.
It is not a high bar.
I know. Seriously. Low bar right here, man. Lower your standards.
That's right.
Lower them further. There you go.
Right about there. That's good.
That's good right there. That's right there. It'll give us a chance to prepare for each upcoming season more thoroughly. So we're really looking forward to being able to do that. But if you have any questions, let us know on social media or by emailing barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com.
And if you registered for Mythmoot, you can actually ask us in person because we'll be seeing you soon.
Yeah. And if you aren't coming, don't worry. We'll be airing that live on Facebook at the time of the event. Just as a reminder, that's Saturday, the 23rd of June at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. So, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be putting that up on the podcast feed the next day as a regular episode.
And although we're not going to ask you for anything, if you'd like to see how we're doing towards our Patreon goals, you can see those at patreon.com/prancingponypod. And of course, we want to give a really special shout out to our patrons at the Cure-Dance contribution tier. That's DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Don in Vancouver Island, and Emily in Texas. Thank you all so much.
Very much. Thank you. And why don't we go ahead and get on with Barliman's Bag?
Okay.
First question tonight comes to us from Paul D. in Bristol, United Kingdom. Just listening to the excellent and admirable episode 65 of the podcast. Oh, I love that. And I was suddenly struck by lightning by a word that you used.
Nicely
good
done.
Question. Well done. And he knows how to get his question asked.
Yep.
By a word that you used that I hadn't really picked up on before. Wand. Yes, the magical folk in the Harry Potter series of books use wands, but why, I wonder, has Gandalf got one? I obviously assume that it refers to a staff, but why the change of words? So that's the resident word nerd. Go for it.
I do have an answer for this one because, believe it or not, I've actually answered this question before, just not on the podcast. Like most questions in life, I can answer it with a healthy dose of pedantic etymology.
Let's minimize the pedantic nature of it.
Let's just keep it healthy. Let's do that.
There you go.
As many listeners probably know, I think we've mentioned it before on the podcast. I honestly can't remember, but
I think
it's probably come up. Gandalf's name is not Tolkien's own invention. The name Gandalf comes from Norse mythology. It's from a poem called Völuspá from the Poetic Edda. And in Völuspá, it was the name of a dwarf, which, of course, we've talked before about how it was originally named for Thorin. And that's why, he kind of gave dwarf name to Thorin. Anyway. But it comes from two Old Norse words. The first one is Gandr, meaning wand or staff. And the second is Alfr, meaning elf. So, although it was originally a dwarf name and Tolkien used it as a wizard name, it literally means elf with a wand, or elf of the wand, or elf with a staff, something to that effect, because Gandalf can mean wand or staff. I'm certain we talked about the meaning of elf of the wand, because Tolkien himself explains the name that way in the Istari section of Unfinished Tales. He says, speaking of Olorin, he says, "Mostly he journeyed unwearyingly on foot, leaning on a staff, and so he was called among men of the north Gandalf, the elf of the wand. For they deemed him, though in error, as has been said, to be of elven kind, since he would at times work wonders among them, loving especially the beauty of fire. And yet such marvels he wrought mostly for mirth and delight, and desired not that any should hold him in awe or take his counsels out of fear." So in that passage, it's very clear that Tolkien is using the terms wand and staff interchangeably. I mean, he literally says he had a staff, so they called him Elf of the Wand. And I think that's what he's doing in The Hobbit as well. He just uses those two terms interchangeably in reference to Gandalf because, I mean, presumably because the word at the root of his name does mean both.
Right. And in fact, the Oxford Dictionary Online today even lists staff as one of the meanings of the word wand, a staff or rod held as a symbol of office. So, given Tolkien's fondness for reviving archaic forms, we really shouldn't be surprised to see him go back to an earlier meaning of the word wand that's really fallen out of use. Kind of makes me think of his odd spelling of glede that we discussed a few chapters back.
Oh, yeah.
Or the fact that he used V's instead of F's for dwarves and elves. But, from the context in a few places, I think we can safely say that despite occasionally being called a wand, Tolkien clearly had in mind what we would call today a staff. I mean, the passage you just read, Sean, a minute ago, said specifically that he leaned on it.
Right, exactly. And that kind of reminds me of the little standoff between Gandalf and Hama at the doors of Meguseld. Do you remember when Hama said, "The staff in the hand of a wizard may be more than a prop for age"?
I love that line.
It's so cool.
That's a good memory, Sean. I'm impressed with that. Good recollection. We'll get to that, too,
favorites.
In about 3 years, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, rest assured, Paul, it was a true staff. It was a two-hander, not one of those little side arms that the folks at Hogwarts use. So, there you go.
There you go.
Well, our next question comes to us from Melanie T. in San Francisco. She asks another question that has a little bit to do with the old Grey Pilgrim, so why don't I go ahead and read that?
I think you should.
She says, "Is there any discussion of relative power or strength of power among the Maiar that came to Middle-earth? I was just thinking about how Melian created the girdle of Melian and had power over the substances of Arda, if I'm remembering correctly.
And she is.
How does that compare to the Istari, the wizards? It seems like there is a big difference between Melian and the Istari. If that is so, is there anything in the legendarium that says why? Do the Astari have the same level of power and just choose not to use it? To be influencers of elves and men instead of coming with force? Or do they actually have less power? It's a big question, and there are a lot of pieces of it to tackle. I think we'll do our best to cover them all. But Alan, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Well, okay. To the first question, no. There isn't anything in Tolkien's words about relative power or strength among the Maiar. Some were stronger than others, we hear. He does say that, but we don't have any details or rankings or anything like that. Top 10 Maiar.
No Maiar leaderboards or anything like that.
They generally seem to be fairly balanced in the sense that some are stronger in specific ways. For example, and probably the most obvious example, in Valaquenta tells us that Eonwe, the banner bearer and herald of Manwë, whose might in arms is surpassed by none in Arda. Well, that means that Eonwe is the best warrior in all of Arda when it comes to weapons.
Right.
So even Tulkas, the strong man of the Valar, couldn't beat Eonwe with a sword, even though Eonwe is just a Maia. Now, that doesn't mean Eonwe is greater than Tulkas in every way, of course. I mean, a wrestling match, Tulkas is going to win.
Right.
But, in a sword fight, well, Eonwe is the best, so he's stronger there.
So in that way, he is mightier. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, in regards to your second question, Melanie, first of all, yes, you are remembering correctly. Melian did have power over the substance of Arda. Those are the exact words that Tolkien uses in Silmarillion chapter 22. He says, "For love of Elwë Singolo, she took upon herself the form of the elder children of Ilúvatar, and in that union she became bound by the chain and trammels of the flesh of Arda. In that form she bore to him Luthien Tinuvio, and in that form she gained a power over the substance of Arda. And by the girdle of Melian was Doriath defended, through long ages, from the evils without."
Well, we need to pay attention to the beginning of that passage. She took that form upon herself.
Right.
Automatically, that's a big difference between Melian and the Astari, because the Astari's limitations were placed upon them by the Valar. They were physically limited because they were actually placed in incarnate flesh bodies that could be hungry, that could be cold, and that could be killed. And they were also limited by rules as to what they could and could not do to achieve their mission. So the answer to that question is yes, they were actually less powerful, but they also had rules to follow. Those rules are explained in Unfinished Tales, and I'm going to read a section from that from the Astari. "And this the Valar did," meaning sending them as emissaries, "desiring to amend the errors of old, especially that they had attempted to guard and seclude the Eldar by their own might and glory fully revealed. Whereas now their emissaries were forbidden to reveal themselves in forms of majesty, or to seek to rule the wills of men and elves by open display of power, but coming in shapes weak and humble, were bidden to advise and persuade men and elves to good, and to seek to unite in love and understanding all those whom Sauron, should he come again, would endeavor to dominate and corrupt." So, and I love that passage. But
it's a great passage.
So in addition to those rules, I mentioned that the Valar were limited. I'm sorry, the Valar weren't limited. The Valar limited the Astari physically so that they wouldn't have as much power to draw from. Tolkien explained this in letter 156. Part of this is what I mentioned earlier. He says, "By incarnate, I mean they were embodied in physical bodies, capable of pain and weariness, and of afflicting the spirit with physical fear, and of being killed. The purpose was precisely to limit and hinder their exhibition of power on the physical plane, and so that they should do what they were primarily sent for: train, advise, instruct, arouse the hearts and minds of those threatened by Sauron to a resistance with their own strengths, and not just do the job for them."
And that is really key, because that really was their role, was just to be counselors, advisors, and not to just fight the battle for them.
Kind of goes back to the thing we did at the philology fair at the beginning about that kind of wizard.
Not being that kind of wizard, yeah.
Right.
So we've established that the Astari did actually have less power than Melian, not because they were weaker Maiar by nature, but just by virtue of the limitations that were placed upon them by the Valar.
Right.
Now here's a curveball. Even though Melian didn't
it wouldn't be the Prancing Pony podcast without a curveball.
If we didn't dig deep enough to find something that we need to include. Even though Melian didn't have external limitations placed on her, she was subject to limitations just as a result of having been in her elven form as Thingol's queen so long.
Right.
That's what Tolkien means when he says she became bound by the chain and trammels of the flesh of Arda.
Exactly.
I'm going to go now to an essay written by Tolkien around 1959, 1960. It's called Osanwe Kenta, The Enquiry into the Communication of Thought. It's published in...
This sounds like you're digging deep.
I'm digging very deep here. This is, if you've seen the meme of like the iceberg where the Silmarillion is, the iceberg underneath, this is like way down deep, where like the anglerfish and all the weird things with, the bioluminescent, creatures live.
The Midnight Zone.
Yeah. So this is actually published in issue 39 of the linguistic journal, Vinyar Tengwar. And the reason it's published there is because
is deep.
Yeah, but it's Tolkien's own words, and the reason it's published there is because it's primarily about basically telepathy among the Valar and Eldar.
Yeah. Okay.
But it also has some very interesting things to say about the differences between incarnates, which are beings embodied by creation. Basically anybody who has to wear a body, elves, men, hobbits, and we can add Istari to that list.
Right.
The difference between them and the Ainur that are self-arrayed, or just wearing raiment, as we've described before.
Okay, right.
I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but basically the gist of it is that if one of the Ainur uses the same hroa or body for a long time, they get bound to it. And even more so if they engage in certain physical activities. Listen to this.
Yeah, that's right. I remember this. We talked about it with Melian, didn't we?
Yeah. And that's exactly who he mentions here. He says, the things that are most binding are those that in the incarnate have to do with the life of the hroa itself. And remember, hroa means body. Right. Its sustenance and its propagation. Thus, eating and drinking are binding. Most binding is begetting or conceiving.
Oh.
And Tolkien goes on to mention Melian specifically. He says, if they are done, then the spirit must dwell in the body that it used, and be under the same necessities as the incarnate. The only case that is known in the histories of the Eldar is that of Melian, who became the spouse of King Elufingol. This certainly was not evil or against the will of Eru, and though it led to sorrow, both elves and men were enriched.
Right. Or ennobled.
Ennobled, as he often said, and as I love to say.
Yeah.
So even though Melian was self-arrayed, she wasn't incarnate like the Istari, because she lived as Thingol's queen, basically living the life of one of the children of Ilúvatar, for most intents and purposes, eating, drinking, probably holding Cyros's hair when he was drunk and throwing up. And I would say,
awesome. That's awesome.
And I would say, most importantly, making a baby.
Wow.
That all of those things bound her to her body in a way that was similar to the incarnates and created some physical limitations for her. Now, nobody forbade her from using the power she had, so I'm assuming that's why she was still able to gain that power over the substance of Arda. But otherwise, she had a lot of limitations very similar to the Istari.
Yeah, but that came about from her choices, rather
from her choices, as opposed to this decree of the Valar. Yeah, exactly.
Right. That is fascinating. Well, fascinating I think we've probably got time for one more, since this is a short one. Tara D. wrote into us to ask, what happened to that library, and indeed all of Rivendell, when Elrond and later Celeborn and the last of the Noldor headed into the West?
Well, it is a short question, and I think we've got a short answer here as well. So after Elrond and Galadriel went into the West, and that's at the end of Lord of the Rings, we learn that Celeborn actually moved to Rivendell, and he lived with Elrond's sons, Elladan and Elrohir.
Which, of course, those would be Celeborn's grandsons. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah. So he moves in with them, and Grandpa moving in with the kids sounds like a wonderful premise for an 80s sitcom.
It sure does. That Elladan, he's at it again. Celeborn, come on, Grandpa.
Oh, you're so square, Grandpa. Come on. So we're actually told this in the note on the Shire records, which is part of the prologue to Lord of the Rings. It says, it was probably at Great Smiles that the Tale of Years was put together, with the assistance of material collected by Meriadoc. Though the dates given are often conjectural, especially for the Second Age, they deserve attention. It is probable that Meriadoc obtained assistance and information from Rivendell, which he visited more than once. There, though Elrond had departed, his sons long remained, together with some of the high elven folk. It is said that Celeborn went to dwell there after the departure of Galadriel, but there is no record of the day when at last he sought the Grey Havens, and with him went the last living memory of the elder days in Middle-earth.
Wow. Well, presumably Mary wasn't visiting Rivendell for the free Wi-Fi, so it stands to reason. Well, he probably wasn't there for the maps either, knowing his. No, that was Pippin who didn't look at the maps. Mary did. Yeah. It stands to reason that the library was still there, and that's where he was getting his information.
That's what I'm thinking.
At least for as long as Celeborn and the grandson stuck around. Boy, you're not kidding. That would be a great 80s sitcom.
Wouldn't it, though? Yeah.
But, that probably wasn't too long afterwards, because on Aragorn's deathbed, and this is in Appendix A for the tale of Aragorn and Arwen, He says, "The hour is indeed hard, yet it was made even in that day when we met under the white birches in the garden of Elrond where none now walk." So, although we don't know for certain when Celeborn left for the Grey Havens, and we really don't know anything about whether Elladan and Elrohir went into the West or stayed and died as mortal men, we do know that by the time of Aragorn's death on March the 1st, 4th Age 120, Rivendell was empty. As for the library, well, who knows? But some of that knowledge, at least, was preserved in the Shire.
That's true. And I suspect that Tolkien wants us to believe that what was preserved in the Shire is all that remains, and that the rest of the knowledge has just been lost. And maybe it was taken back into the West when they left, the last boats left.
That's exactly the kind of thing Tolkien would do. He'd leave some fragmentary knowledge here and there, some textual ruins, and the rest just removed from the world.
Gone.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks to Paul, Melanie, and Tara. And folks, that almost wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. As always, thank you very much for joining us. And we want to remind you that even though we're finished with the text of The Hobbit tonight, we're not done with Season 2 just yet.
Nope, not at all. We've got one more grand finale episode to wrap up our discussion of The Hobbit. We've got a list of themes a mile long.
At least.
Well, no, maybe it's not quite that long, but we'll make it seem that long when we talk about it. You can be sure.
That's right. We can make a yard feel like a mile.
That's right. And we still have a couple of more episodes in the season to look forward to after that.
Yes, we do. In the meantime, we invite you to please check out the official library tab on our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. We've got links to everything from inexpensive paperbacks for you to mark up during your read through Lord of the Rings, to some really good stuff for your Tolkien collection.
And if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes for us and leaving a review, we'd be really grateful. Those reviews help us get more visibility in iTunes, and that just translates to a bigger and more exciting community listening to us.
Absolutely. And thanks to those of you who have, by the way. Not only do we still read every one of them, but we are also featuring one a week on our social media networks on #ThankfulThursdays. Now make sure you never miss an episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast by subscribing to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And thanks again to all of you who've become part of our social media circles. We set out to start a Tolkien conversation that everyone could join, and that's why we have the online common room on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and also on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
That's right. And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and tips for dealing with a grouchy Sackville-Baggins.
Oh, they can be the worst.
Oh, they can. So send those to Barnabas at theprancingponypodcast.com, and we'll try to get them into our next episode. As always, no matter how much time we've had, it's still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.